Kate here for the penultimate ranking 100 Victorian books video. It has been such a fun project. I'm just very much anticipating all of the discussions that will be happening in the comments with you, and I hope this has been enjoyable for you. I did realize as I was editing the previous videos, so now I have filmed and edited the first 8 videos. Here I am with the last 2, that somehow I got off in the numbering, and I'll just show you like how my notebook was organized. I got off by 1 number, so then I had to reorient all my numbers. So I was saying the wrong numbers in videos as far as like I skipped 1 at some point. So I would say that it was going to be books like 19 through 10, you know, but that doesn't make sense because then when I get to the top 10, I'm not going to do books 9 through 0. So anyhow, sorry if that was confusing. In this video, I will be doing books 20 through 11. That's what it is. But also, it is very hard to keep everything completely organized as far as all of the Victorian novels you have read. And I thought I was keeping up on this, but as I was doing this, I realized I was off by about 5, apparently. And some of them, like Jude the Obscure, I'm not going to bother putting that in this list because it would be so down low on the list. But I realized Kilvert's Diary that I read from last year was not on the list. So I did want to do an honorable mention here, and it would be somewhere in the top 30. I do know that. This is a real diary of Francis Kilvert, who was a clergyman in the Church of England, and it's his day-to-day observations. And it's very much, it feels very true to life because there are some really sweet things that happen. There's some funny things. There are some very tragic things. A couple of instances that really struck me were women going insane after having children. And it was so harrowing to read about. Something just happened with them, like a switch was flipped. And also hearing about people with really intense chronic pain. Those things really stuck out to me, you know, seeing these people that it was just a struggle to get through the day to day. And you can see the compassion that he has for people. And also how often he is struck by the natural beauty of the world. And I loved it. So I didn't want to go the whole series of these videos without mentioning this. I don't know how I neglected to put it in my Google Sheets document, but it is there now. So without further ado then, book 20 that I hinted at in my last video, saying it's in the same category as Deerbrook, a more domestic kind of novel, and that is The Heir of Redcliff by Charlotte Yonge. I really enjoyed this book so much. You are following the one family, and let me see if it says that they're the Edmonstons. And then they have a cousin, Guy, who there is a curse on Guy's ancestors. And so the whole book, kind of you as a reader and then Guy himself and the Edmonstons are wondering how Guy will do living under this family curse. You know, whether it does define you or whether the actions that you make as a human being have more of an impact on the fate that you will have in this world. And it's really interesting to see Guy really grappling with that, and then how different members of the Edmonston family judge him particularly. What I love about this also is there's a lot of camaraderie between the characters. You see their kind of inside jokes and the things that they're excited about, the interests that they have, the books and art and culture that they're interested in. There is also really excellent disability representation for one of the Edmonston children who is in a wheelchair. And I love that about this book. You can tell that I feel Charlotte Yonge was such an empathetic person, and she shows so much love and what do I want to say? She just deals with a gentle hand with all of her characters. And I do love that each character feels distinct and you're just doing life with these characters. It does feel kind of slice of life, which is one of my favorite kinds of things, the day-to-day. And while some people I think find it tedious, I just find it relaxing and calming. Like it feels a very safe and secure environment. And for that, I loved this book. There are some really sad things that happen in this, but it makes it poetic and beautiful in my eyes. So I definitely recommend The Heir of Redcliff. Charlotte Yonge wrote many, many, many books, and she was a part of the Oxford movement, which was a movement within the Anglican Church that wanted to harken back to as many Catholic Catholic traditions and parts of Catholic liturgy as they could without actually being under the Pope's authority. So it's very interesting to see how this comes into play in here. And I highly recommend The Heir of Redclyffe. All right, next on the list, a book that I agonized over but loved at the same time. And this is book 19, and that is Ramallah by George Eliot. This was such a labor of love reading this. I read this January 2020. Christy Lewis read this along with me. She's such a trooper because she hadn't read all that many Victorian novels, and she stuck with Romola. And then Claire, my good friend Claire, who is a longtime subscriber, read this with us also. And it's hard for me to put into words how I feel about Romola because it was not a book at all that came easily to me. This is a book that is very much, it has very heavy church history components. It is set in Florence, Italy during the Medici era. So it's a very interesting and unique setting compared to a lot of historical fiction that comes out now. And it's interesting to think about reading Victorian era historical fiction. And it is just the character of Romola I found so fascinating. And the scenes that are focusing on Savonarola and different church history figures I found pretty taxing to read and not all that rewarding. But then on the flip side, the scenes with Romola and Tito is one of our main characters, and he has this very unique dynamic with Romola. And the ways that their decisions that they make have these ripple effects, and also sort of the longing for knowledge and sharing that knowledge with others. There's such a love of learning in this book. And I love the tagline on here is trust nobody. If you trust, you will be betrayed. So you're really following these characters at a very unique time within Florence. This book, though, is just so full to the brim, packed to the brim with symbolism and underlying messages she is putting forth, but also a very interesting plot. And I felt I really just scratched the surface this first time of reading it. I hope by the end of my life to have read this 10 times. That's honestly when I feel like I could kind of get a grasp on it. So it had this real impenetrable quality about it, but it made it so memorable. And there were a couple scenes in there that I could still tear up just thinking about them. And the intense heartbreak you see some of the characters go through, and some of the deceit you see other characters being involved in. It's just makes your blood boil. You're so angry. And this book makes you feel so many things. It's a lot of work, but it is so worth it. Yes, so that is why Romola is at number 19. Then we get to number 18, and that is Grania by Emily Lawless. This book just utterly swept me away. The otherworldly vibe that I talked about for A Welsh Witch and The Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy is in Grania. It's on this small island off the coast of Ireland and off the coast of Galway specifically, the islands of Arran. And it has this real claustrophobic feel to it. The landscape is such a character in and of itself. And Grania feels, you don't know, or she feels just so trapped in her life, and that she will never be able to achieve true happiness in the kind of insular life that she has. And it's her quest for happiness. And the slow building tension in this is brilliant. As you see, it's building towards the climax and building and building and building. And I could not stop reading. I was so compelled to continue on with this book. The setting in this is so beautiful. I think I just gave up at annotating and underlining because it was incredibly beautiful. So I most definitely will be rereading this many times. And yes, if you want a good packs a punch kind of gothic vibe, I definitely recommend Grania. And then number 17 is Goblin Market and Other Poems by Christina Rossetti. This is the first poetry collection that I can say I absolutely loved. Christina Rossetti felt like such a kindred spirit as I was reading this. The poem Goblin Market is about these two sisters, and they're visiting a market where there are goblins selling all of these kind of sensual and worldly things. So it's they're represented, you know, by different fruit and food and wares, but it's really, I think, symbolizing worldly desires and being taken in by temptation. And the way that it's written is just delicious. Every single word is so intentional and just has such an atmosphere that it puts to the poem of Goblin Market. And then the rest of the poems I loved as well. There is a good chunk of them. Let's see how this is organized. I can't quite remember. That are devotional pieces. So a bruised reed shall he not break. Consider the lilies of the field. The love of Christ which passeth knowledge is so beautiful. And just, she has such a way of putting biblical truths in a light that I hadn't thought of before. And you can tell it's just, her faith is precious, precious, precious to her. And it's beautiful to see that. And then she has more everyday poems. Some of the names, Remember, A Birthday, An End, My Dream, The Hour and the Ghost, An Apple Gathering, Winter, My Secret, and beautiful, beautiful writing. So I loved that I read this because it ended up being such a beloved book. And it's made me try harder with poetry very slowly. You know, I'm working my way through Gerard Manley Hopkins' poetry collection. It's a lot, but it makes it feel worth it if a poetry collection ended up as number 17 on the list. All right, then we get to number 16 and a very pacey page turner, and that is Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This is my favorite Mary Elizabeth Braddon book, and it is following Lady Audley, who is the new Lady Audley, and she is a bit mysterious. She has a secret, you can tell from the title, and we don't know what her secret is. Where did she come from? Who is she? And a family member of Lord Audley's visited. What is his name? It does not say. But he visits and he thinks there is more to this Lady Audley than meets the eye, and he wants to know. Just the impending sense of bigger things happening. You know, the game is afoot definitely applies to this. I love the tension building in this and how it keeps you so compelled to keep turning the pages. And for those that feel intimidated by Victorian novels, read Lady Audley's Secret. You will not regret it. What I love is it's such a page turner, but it has very interesting characterization and beautiful, beautiful Victorian language in it. And I loved it so much. All right, then we get to number 15. Sorry, my numbers are all off. Number 15, and that is Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. So there are some Dickens books that I absolutely love and adore, and Dombey and Son is one of them. I think that I was not expecting to love this so much at all. But Katie from Books and Things, I'm so glad she talked it up so much. And it is about Paul Dombey. And he has 2 children, a daughter and a son. And the book is called Danby and Son. So if you can hazard a guess at which child he's kind of more interested in pouring his energy into, you would guess correctly if you guessed the son. So he's so focused on the business that he really neglects his daughter. And then certain big events happen in their family, and it just makes this whole slew of events occur. But what I love also that Dickens does very well is having, he has kind of different kinds of plots within the same novel. So then there's this sort of very intensely building mystery that's happening. There's also some very interesting female characters in this, which you don't always get with Dickens. I loved this. I loved it. It's one that I'm very eager to reread once I have read all of Dickens' books, which I only have 2 left. I love Dombey and Son. I think maybe it would be worth a try if you haven't enjoyed other Dickens books. Then we move on to number 14, and that is Adam Bede by George Eliot. Adam Bede was my it was my 4th George Eliot, but it was the one that made me finally realize, okay, George Eliot is a favorite author. I want to read all of her books. Give me more. Please, please, please. The inspiration for this was based on true events that happened. George Eliot I think it was a cousin. Let's see here. So she had an aunt that was a Methodist preacher, and she saw this very tragic event that happened, and she relayed the story to George Eliot, and the story stuck with her forever. And so she then kind of, I think, after reading Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, kind of took the components of the story she heard from her aunt and then The Scarlet Letter and put them together for this really harrowing novel. This does have some very upsetting things in it. And I think the first time I read it, I was just so in awe of her writing. It didn't really hit me fully how upsetting they were. And then this February, I reread it and thought, wow, there is so much emotional weight in her words. She has such power in her words. There is a real ache about most of her novels. So you have to be ready to go all in emotionally. But it kind of has this love triangle where we have Hetty Sorrel, who is in love with Arthur Donnithorne. And she is just head over heels for him. And then at the same time, Adam Bede, our main character, is in love with Hetty Sorrel. And you're just following this interworking of all of these different plot elements happening and seeing these characters. It's very heavy on characterization, which is, gold for me. I love books with heavy characterization. And what I love is that just as Elizabeth Gaskell has characters that are flawed but sympathetic, George Eliot has the same. And you see these characters that you might be facepalming over their personal decisions, but you still have a lot of grace for these characters. And she shows a lot of grace to her characters. And it's very, very good. So I hope more people try Adam Bede, maybe if they haven't liked George Eliot in the past. And then moving on to number 13, and that is Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. This is my favorite Thomas Hardy. As much as I love The Return of the Native, I have to be in a very specific mood to read it, whereas this, I kind of could feel up for reading it any old time. It's about Bathsheba Everdeen, and she inherits a sheep farm. And you really, when you are a farmer, you are at the mercy of the land. And in a lot of Thomas Hardy books, the landscape really has a very big specific presence in the books, and it definitely does in this one. And I think it's just, to be honest, I like this book despite Bathsheba. I do not like her as a character. I think she is extremely selfish and just so self-involved. She doesn't have any consideration for how her actions might affect the feelings of those around her. So, but I'm saying that to show you how much I like this book, because it's, number 13 on the list, and I like it that much despite disliking the main character of Bathsheba. So it's twisty-turny like most Thomas Hardy, and beautiful, beautiful, and I want to reread it. Then we move on to number 12, which is Framley Parsonage by Anthony Trollope. This is my favorite out of the Barsetshire series. Not surpassed by Dr. Thorne, not surpassed by The Small House at Allington. This one, Framley Parsonage. And when you hear me tell you the plot, you're going to be like, really, Kate? That's, a whole book about that is your favorite? And it is almost 600 pages, and it is about someone who writes a check, or a bad check from them is received. And the whole book is about him trying to prove whether or not he did in fact give someone a bad check. And Mark Robarts, he goes through some rough times because he's a clergyman. So, they're held to this higher standard, and he genuinely cannot remember whether he wrote a bad check or not. And you're right there with him, grieving with him. But you come to love him and his family so much, and that he is a man who is so, his convictions, he does not let them just go unnoticed. If he is being convicted about something, he's not just going to let it sit there. And I love that about him, how firm he is. And yes, it's just, the characterization in Anthony Trollope's books is just delicious. So I love Framley Parsonage, my favorite out of the Barsetshire series. I want to continue on with his Palliser series. So hopefully sooner rather than later I will. And then we move on Number 11, the last one for this video, Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was my last full-length Elizabeth Gaskell novel to read. I read it 3 Victobers ago, and I was very scared to read it because I just was certain I wasn't going to like it. And I was so pleased to be wrong. It does start off fairly similar to North and South in that it's this industrial town and you're seeing the working class and the upper class, the masters and the men, but it has a very different feel to it. It's much more pacey than North and South. North and South does have some twists and turns, but I don't know, this just feels maybe more pulpy is the right term. And it has so much in the plot that happens that I can't give away to you. So I'll just say, you know, it starts off where kind of just, what am I trying to say? Fairly easygoing in the pacing of the plot, and then something happens. Something huge happens, and the rest of the book is a whirlwind. And I think there are some beautiful relationships in this, some very interesting characters, and it is just, you feel so compelled to keep reading. And it's Elizabeth Gaskell, so between her characterization and her dialogue and her describing the settings around them, it's beautiful. So I loved Mary Barton, and I was so pleased with how much I loved it. I was not expecting to love it that much. I definitely recommend it. All right, that gets to book number 11. So the next video are books, the top 10 books, 10 through 1, and you'll find out. And thank you if you have stayed with me this long, and I'll be back with another video soon. Bye.